Today, the horror movie syllabus is looking at ambiguous horror movies. And Webster's dictionary defines ambiguous as having multiple interpretations or more than one meaning. So that's what we're going to take to heart when we talk about. Now, that's a pretty handsome guy, right? Horror movies that have. No, that's so clever. You think you're watching The Professor, but you're actually watching The Professor watch The Professor. Okay, I get it. All right, fine. I admit it. The joke's gotten old. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below. It'll give you a pretty good idea of what the syllabus is all about. But in short, we look at a particular subgenre of horror and then pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. Today, we're looking at ambiguous horror movies. And right off the bat, I'll admit that what I mean by that is rather ambiguous. It's not clear what ambiguous horror is going to mean. So let's try to define that a little bit. Ambiguity means when there's more than one way of interpreting something or more than one way of looking at it. And that's really what we're going to focus on. We're going to focus on horror movies that have multiple interpretations. People can see it in a couple different ways. Or maybe a simpler way of looking at it is when you're questioning what actually happened in the movie. Is it this or is it that? Did this happen or did this happen? What's the reality of the situation? Using the term loosely because we're talking about movies, not reality, but you get the idea. And let's be honest, there's a lot of movies that have this kind of aspect in it, this kind of ambiguity as to what happened. Is this person really the killer or is this person the killer? You know, things like that. A lot of them wind up resolving by the end of the movie. You figure out by the end of the movie what it is, and the ambiguity is erased or solidified. But we're talking about movies where that's not really the case, where by the end of the movie, you're still left with a question mark as to what really happened or what was the actual events that transpired. That's what I'm focusing on when I'm talking about ambiguous horror movies. And I think it'll become apparent as we go on through the list what qualifies. Really, what we're talking about is movies where the theme is ambiguous. The whole idea, the whole plot is ambiguous. What really happened in the movie? Or a significant, memorable part of the movie is ambiguous, where there's a scene or a plot point or a character or something like that that's a little ambiguous. So you're not quite clear what's the reality of the situation, or it could be interpreted in a number of different ways. Hopefully that's kind of clear and not too ambiguous. And yeah, I'm beating that horse. I know. But you'll get the idea. Like I said, as we go through the movies, you'll get the idea of what I'm going for, what I'm focusing on in these kinds of movies. As usual, we've organized the movies into undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate levels. And in this case, it's going to indicate the increasing level of how much I like them. But let me be clear. I like all of the movies that we're talking about today very much. So I'm splitting hairs and talking about how much I like them, but I like them all a lot. So with that, let's go ahead and without any ambiguity, get right into these movies. The first movie we're talking about today, the undergraduate level selection, is Jacob's Ladder. Jacob's Ladder came out in 1990 and was something of a mainstream big budget type release that really has become more of a cult movie in recent years. Like, it has its following, but it was never something, mainstream success like Silence of the Lambs type thing. It's really something that's kind of caught on or endured in large part because of the ambiguity in the movie. If you're not familiar with it, Jacob's Ladder stars Tim Robbins as a Vietnam veteran who is experiencing post-war hallucinations or flashbacks or weird things going on. And the question is whether or not these things that he's seeing, these hallucinations and these events, are they real? Is it something that's really happening? Is something supernatural going on? Or is it all in his head? Or has the government done something to him? What's going on? What's happening to him? What can he perceive as real? What can he perceive as not real? And as the audience, what are we supposed to believe is real and not real when it comes to this reliable narrator? And I won't go any farther than that, so as to not spoil the movie, of course. But suffice to say that The movie does kind of, in the end, give somewhat of a definitive answer, although I think it's debatable whether or not that definitive answer is actually definitive. But I'll get to that in a second. But like I was saying, a lot of these movies that have ambiguity in them wind up getting resolved at the end, and there's an argument to be made that Jacob's Ladder is one of those movies. But the movie is so focused on this ambiguity throughout the movie that I think it deserves to be on the list. The crux of the movie is what is going on with Tim Robbins. Is it really happening to him, or is it in his head? And that's the main plot of the movie, is trying to sort that out. And there's a lot of different explanations that are thrown out there, a lot of different things offered up. And you've got, Tim Robbins is your focal point for the movie, somewhat of an unreliable narrator. He doesn't know what's going on, and as a result, you as an audience member following him, you don't know what's going on either. So every time you're presented with one of these explanations or solutions, it's very plausible. It's very real that that could be the solution, but you don't know because you don't know who to trust anymore in terms of the narrative. You don't know if the information you're being given is real or imaginary. And that's what makes it such an effective movie. I think that's why it's endured as a cult classic. I think that's why people still talk about it to this day, is that that kind of ride that it takes you on is pretty fun. Not knowing what to expect, not knowing what to believe. If you're willing to go along with that ride, you're going to have a good time. The movie is really well made. It's directed by Adrian Lyne, who we've talked about recently when we talked about Fatal Attraction. And he's a great director. He really knows how to pace a movie, how to build up tension appropriately, how to tap into that paranoia and dread. And he does so really well here. Tim Robbins gives a great performance. He's done a lot of movies that are in the horror thriller-esque realm, and we may or may not talk about him again in the future. It depends. But he gives a good performance here. You like him. You're on his side, and you start to feel the frustration that he feels as things get weird. I think that the direction plays out really well in terms of the hallucinations and the strange events that occur. They are very strange, very interesting, and when perceptions change, and I'm trying to dance around this a little bit because I don't want to spoil the movie too much, but when perceptions change and Tim Robbins' character finds himself in somewhat of a different reality, uh, it doesn't feel jarring. As an audience member, you're going along with this, and I think that's a testament to the direction and the writing. It works out rather well. I know that this movie was not a big hit; it was a hard sell. I think it's based on a book, and I have not read the book, but it's a heavy concept and it's a challenging one, but it's told in a way that's pretty easy to go with. It's pretty accessible, even though it's kind of a highbrow concept and pretty interesting, deep stuff. I think you can roll with it pretty well on a surface level, just going along for the ride. But if you're willing to dig into it a little bit deeper, it gets really fascinating. It brings up issues of maybe scientific testing, religious things, psychological explanations. There's a lot of things thrown out there that might be explaining what's happening in the movie. And like I said, at the end of the movie, it feels like it's giving you a definitive answer of what's really happened, but I'm pretty sure you can make an argument that even that's not definitive. I know that there are people that suggest that even though what's suggested at the end of the movie may not really be what actually happened. And I like that because it preserves that ambiguity in the movie. It just keeps that ride going and allows you to have more interesting conversations about the movie after you've seen it, and kind of tease out different theories or how some of the other theories might still play out. Again, you're going to see this theme a lot today in this video, that I'm talking around things so as not to spoil the movies, and some of the ambiguity can't be out and out said because it's going to kind of spoil things. So we're going to kind of make the best we can with this, and this is one of those. Without talking about the ending, it's hard to explain what I'm saying here, but if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. You know that the ending kind of explains what's actually happened. But I wonder, could some of these other explanations that are presented throughout the movie still apply? So if you have seen the movie, in the comments below, let me know if you think that. If you think that ending is dispositive and that's actually what has happened, or do you feel like maybe that's not dispositive? Maybe something else is still going on. Maybe one of the other suggestions in the movie is still at play. I'd be curious to see what you think about that. But if you haven't seen Jacob's Ladder, I definitely think it's one you should check out. It's a very well made movie. It's got a great performances across the board, and especially Tim Robbins. He's your anchor in the movie, and it's one that I think it can be a fun ride, but it can also make you think. And if you want to put the effort into thinking about it, you will, and you'll be rewarded for that. So definitely check it out if you haven't. The second movie we're talking about today, the graduate level selection, is American Psycho. American Psycho came out in the year 2000 and is based on the Bret Easton Ellis novel of the same name. And I'm a big fan of both the book and the novel, but they are not without their controversies, especially the book. And as a result, made it for an interesting adaptation to the screen, one that winds up being rather successful in my opinion. If you haven't seen it, the movie follows Patrick Bateman, a successful Wall Street guy who is very rich, very caught up in image and superficial stuff, and really surface level person, except that he also hides a deranged serial killer underneath that exterior of that veneer of success and wealth. And the question or the ambiguity is he actually killing people, or is everything all in his head? And that's all I'll say about the movie without wanting to spoil anything for you, of course. But American Psycho is arguably just a slasher movie, but it's so much more because it's a satire of not just horror movies and slashers, but also of the yuppie culture that Wall Street rich culture, that one percenter culture, and it does both really really well while also managing to be a terrifying and grotesque movie. The reason why the movie works is because it stayed focused on that satire. It stayed focused on the humor, the dark black humor of the novel. As I said, the novel written by Bret Easton Ellis is very, very controversial. When it came out, it was highly controversial. And Ellis, one of my favorite writers at the time, was probably my favorite writer and may still be one of, if not my favorite writers. And this book was a huge, huge deal when it came out, in large part because of the controversy. The book is full of incredibly grotesque, graphic, violent, misogynistic stuff. Really, really stuff, like gruesome stuff, over the top, intentionally over the top, because it's poking fun at everything. Everything in the novel is over the top. And when the book got announced that it was being made into a movie, there was a lot of concern about how in the world they would deal with the violence. And wisely, they they minimized it. What they did was they focused on the really bigness of everything else, the exaggeration of everything else in the movie. The wealth, the ambivalence, the arrogance of the characters, the famous business card scene where they're comparing the business cards and people are getting really upset about how better the business cards are for one other person than to you, and 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 how they all look alike. Really, it's a great scene. But wisely, they focused on that aspect of the book, the satire of it, rather than the violence of it. And I think that was the right way to go to make this movie work. They wisely chose a woman named Mary Harron to direct the movie, who is known primarily for a movie called I Shot Andy Warhol, which is very good. But she was kind of a feminist choice, and that was smart because the book had received a lot of negative criticism from like the National Organization of Women and other women's groups for understandable reasons. So having Mary Harron tackle the subject matter was a great way to diffuse that controversy, and it worked really well. She got the book. She really distilled what was essential about it, and that was the superficial nature of the character of Patrick Bateman, how narcissistic he is, how his view of reality is so warped. Not only is it not clear if he's actually killing people, his whole view of how he views the world in general is warped and distorted. And it's not clear if how he sees the world is real at all. There's a lot of instances where characters don't seem to know who they're talking about and not actually recognizing each other. It's not clear if they actually know each other. And that actually is independent of whether or not he's killing people. So all throughout the book and the movie is this ambiguity of what is real and what is not. Setting aside the whole superficiality of his world, the wealth and the trappings of it and all the image consciousness and how fake that is, there's an actual question about what is fake and what is real in his world, both in terms of murders and in terms of his relationships and the way he interacts with the world in general. And the book delves into this and the movie delves into it. And it's great. It's great that the movie figured out the heart of the book and left a lot of the more gruesome things out of the book, out of the movie. Now that said, the movie still has some gruesome stuff in there. Don't get me wrong; it's not shy. It's got some pretty grotesque stuff in there, but it's really leaving more up to your imagination, which is what I think some of the best horror movies actually do. It really plays on you wondering what's happening and leaving just enough off screen to make it very effective. A big part of why all of this works is the performance of Christian Bale as Patrick Bateman. This is before Batman, so this is before he became a real mainstream star. But this is one of those movies that put him on the map, and he absolutely crushes this role. I know that at some point they really considered Leonardo DiCaprio for this movie, and yeah, I can maybe see that. But this movie feels like Christian Bale was born to play this character. He nails every aspect of this. The dry sense of humor, the weird perceptions of it. His physical appearance is perfect for this. Everything is spot on perfect. But the supporting cast, full of a lot of recognizable faces, probably most notably Reese Witherspoon. Everybody's note perfect. Everybody is doing it dead on right. If you've read the novel, you'll be amazed at how well the casting really seems to reflect these characters. And you'll be amazed at how the movies managed to make these characters feel more real than they do in the book, which is the book they're all kind of superficial and almost caricature-y. And the movie does that, but for some reason it works better in the movie than it does in the book. And I love the book, don't get me wrong, but it's a really good interpretation of a novel. It's a challenging novel to adapt, and they did it really well. And it's because the direction was good, the script was good, the acting across the board was good. Everything came together really well in this movie to make it very successful. Now there is technically a sequel to it called American Psycho 2: All American Girl, starring Mila Kunis of all people, and it is, I guess, technically related to this movie, but it's not based on any Ellis book. Pretty sure it's a spec script that was lying around that they just put American Psycho 2 on, and it's pretty bad. It's not even laughably enough bad to be enjoyable. So do with that one what you will. Enter at your own risk. It's Mila Kunis and William Shatner, and it sounds like it should be hilariously awful, but it's not as good as that. It should be more fun than it is, but the original is fantastic. I don't know that I'd call it a bona fide classic, but it might be getting there because here we are 20 plus years later and people are still talking about that movie. It's still got a lot of reverence. It's still got a lot of fans, and it seems like people discover it as time goes on. So definitely one that, if not a bona fide classic, is still kind of a must see for your horror education. So if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. And if you have seen it, let me know what you think of it in the comments below. But also, if you've read the book, let me know your thoughts on the book as well, because I'm a fan of it, but that book is not for everybody. And it's far more gruesome than Alice's other books. So I have thoughts about the books too. We can continue that discussion in the comments below, but let me know what you think. And the last movie that we're talking about today, the postgraduate level selection, is Funny Games. Funny Games came out in 1997 and is an Austrian film directed by Michael Haneke. And we've talked about Haneke not too long ago, actually. And this movie is very well known, has a lot of fans, and even has an American remake. But we'll get to that in just a minute. But if you haven't seen the movie's about a married couple and their young son getting visited by two young men who seem well intentioned enough and just looking to borrow some eggs, but quickly winds up turning into a home invasion movie where the two young men take this family hostage and then subject them to a bunch of cruel psychological, torturous activities, and put them in quite the peril. And then things get really weird. And we'll stop there because I don't want to spoil the movie for you. But suffice to say, Funny Games is an experience. The movie's not necessarily the easiest watch in the world because once it gets going, once this family gets taken hostage, or however you want to put it, and starts getting tormented, it gets really uncomfortable. It's a pretty nail biting kind of thing where it's a really, the sense of uncomfortableness is really prevalent in the movie. But before you even get to that moment, there's just this underlying sense of dread. These two young men show up in the house and kind of work their way in, kind of get themselves invited in, and start antagonizing the family and acting a little bit like just rude and stuff. And it just gives this sense of dread. This gives this this off-putting feeling almost from the get-go. Like just from from the opening credits alone, the way the opening credits hit you, it's gonna set you off kilter. It's gonna put you on edge right away. So even though the early scenes of the movie seem fairly innocent, you can tell they're not. You can tell something's off, and that's Michael Haneke doing what he does. We talked about him when we talked about Cachet recently. He's really great at creating that dread, that sense of unease. That's where he excels. And Funny Games is probably his masterpiece at it. He's really doing a great job of putting the audience kind of in the feet of the family, but not exactly, because we have this meta knowledge that things are going to get worse, and the family, for whatever reason, is kind of talking themselves out of that and letting things slide longer than they should. And before it's too late before they can actually do something about it. By the time they decided to do something, it's too late. And that's where things get really interesting. Performances across the board are great, and that's important because you want to really get sucked in. You want to really buy into this family's plight. But when the torture starts, and it's not really so much physical torture as it is psychological torture, it's harrowing. You really feel for this family because you have been kind of put in their shoes, and you really don't know how you would react to this. But where it gets weird, and again, this is where I'm dancing around things again because I don't want to spoil this movie for you because it gets really interesting. But I'll say this much: at some point, the antagonist breaks the fourth wall, and when that happens, it turns the movie completely on its head. So, in terms of ambiguity, and that's what we're talking about today, you have this movie that, for a large chunk of it, feels like it's a pretty straightforward narrative, a really good one, and then takes a severe left turn, and then you're suddenly asking yourself, is this just a movie? And yes, in real life, it's just a movie, but you're absorbed in this movie. You're invested in these characters, and you're in there like it's real. And then you're suddenly left asking yourself, is this real? Is in the world of the movie, is this real, or is this in somebody's imagination, or is it a surreal film experience? And again, I'm dancing now around this because I don't want to spoil it, but that fourth wall getting broken changes everything. You've got this aspect where you feel like the family is gonna be okay, and there's gonna be a kind of a stereotypical movie ending, and then the movie goes and flips on you so fast, and really either you're gonna roll with this or you're not. And for those of you that's seen it, here's what I'm gonna say: when the rewinding scene happens, either you're with it or you're not. If you can't roll with that, you're gonna have a bad time with the movie. But if you can, you're in for a treat. And that was the point of the movie, where the movie went from being really good to amazing for me. This movie went next level as soon as that happened. And everything that followed was absolutely fantastic. I love this movie. I feel like it's so interesting, this fourth wall breaking thing. Like everything that happens in that last act of the movie is so intriguing and interesting, and it makes it from a standard really good home invasion movie into something entirely different and unique and wonderful. And I can't praise it enough. And I'm not the only one. This movie is very popular amongst people who've actually seen it. Now, I mentioned earlier, there is an American remake of this movie, also directed by Michael Haneke, and it's basically a shot-for-shot remake of his original movie. It came out in 2007, so about 10 years after the original. It stars Naomi Watts and Michael Pitt, and it's excellent. It's excellent because it's the same movie, it's just in English. It's really, he manages to capture all of the same feelings of dread, all of the tone and everything. The vibe is all the same. It's just as effective as the original. So when people ask which one's better, they're on par with each other. I probably push the original button. I like the original just because it's like, it's the original, but I really, really love the remake as well. Naomi Watts is amazing. Michael Pitt is an underrated actor. They're both great. So if you're not into subtitles, watch the American remake. You won't be disappointed. It won't be like you've lost anything in the translation. I think it helped that Haneke did both. And I know there are other people that have remade their own movies, but Haneke doing it really mattered because that sense of dread and unease that he's so good at, he brought that to the remake. So it takes nothing off the table. So you're good either way. So if you struggle with subtitles or things like that, watch the American version. But if you're cool with the sorry, foreign films, watch the Austrian version. They're both great. Watch them both. Compare them. It's remarkable how similar they are and how effective they both are. Remakes rarely wind up being as noteworthy as the original, but this is one that did it. So check out the original, check out the remake, but check it out. If you haven't seen it, check it out. And if you have checked it out, of course, let us know in the comments what you think. I'm obviously very effusive about this, and most people are. I have yet to meet somebody who's just like, oh man, funny games. Nah, it's not for me. But if it's not for you, let us know. But funny games, man. I love this movie and I can't recommend it enough. So that's going to do it for our selections for ambiguous horror movies. But if you like this kind of thing, if you like the ambiguity in your horror, I've got a few extra credit movies to talk to you about. The first one I'm going to mention is a movie called Taurus Trap. And Taurus Trap is maybe a hard sell for this subgenre. I might have shoehorned it in here a little bit because I really, really like it. But I'll make the case for it, and you're going to have to take my word for it because I don't want to spoil it. If you haven't seen the movie is about a group of people that come across a tourist trap, this random wax museum out in the middle of nowhere, run by this guy and his brother. And there are all these wax mannequins, and they seemingly come to life. Though this may be because they're being psychically controlled. But in all events, hijinks abound as these mannequins start to attack. And I won't say any more than that, so not to spoil it. But Tourist Trap, I love it. I love it. It's so wonderfully creepy. These wax mannequins and, by extension, the mask worn by the killer is it's unsettling, it's unnerving, and it's grossly underrated. In fact, if you saw my guest appearance on Noah from Hamburgers and Horrors video about masks, we debated this mask, and we both think that this mask is grossly underrated. It's a fantastic mask. Uh, Creepy mannequins, that's usually hitting for people. Like if you're afraid of dolls or creepy mannequins, things like that, this movie's going to be right in your sweet spot. It's going to be really, really good. The debate about this and why I'm kind of pushing my luck putting it in this video is that it's got this psychic angle, this psychic power angle that is supposedly explains a lot of what would normally be the ambiguity in this movie. But the way that it ends leaves it on a very ambiguous note. But I can't tell you about that or talk about it without spoiling it for you. And I don't want to do that because I really think you should check out Taurus Trap. But suffice to say, that ending's super ambiguous, and it's part of what I love about the movie. I like the whole look of the movie. It's basically like a slasher movie, but it's kind of weird and unique. And then that ending is a grabber in terms of ambiguity. I really, really enjoy it. So I felt justified in putting it here. And if you've seen it and you know the ending, I think you might back me up on that ending deserves to be mentioned in a movie about ambiguous horror films. But if you haven't seen Taurus Trap, if you like a good slasher movie, if you like creepy mannequins, things like that, weird horror, this is one to check out for sure. The second extra credit movie I'm going to mention is De la Morte dell'Amore, which is often referred to as Cemetery Man because that's how it was released in the United States. But De la Morte dell'Amore is a Italian movie that came out in the 90s starring Rupert Everett. And if you haven't seen it, it's the story of a man who is a caretaker at a cemetery where the dead keep rising, and it's kind of his job to put them back down again and make sure they stay dead. It's a public service that he performs for the city, and he's also a lonely man looking for love, and maybe he might find love, but death might get in the way. And I'm getting more and more vague as I describe this movie because I don't want to spoil it for you, and because it's not the easiest thing to describe. That's one of the things that's noteworthy about De la Morte dell'Amore is that it's a strange movie in the best possible way. I was telling a story recently that my wife actually caught the end of this movie with me, and when I was rewatching it, and asked me what the plot of it was, and I was at a loss for explaining it to her any more than what I just did right now. And then I mentioned the story to my buddy Josh over at Movie Timelines, and he said the greatest thing. He said, "What's the plot of a poem?" And I thought it was fantastic, and I said I'm gonna use that in my video because that's kind of what it is. It's poetry. it's something that's up for interpretation. It's something that maybe has different meanings to different people depending on what you're bringing to the table. In terms of straightforward narrative, it kind of doesn't matter. There is a through line, there's a story going on there, but it's surreal and strange and doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense, and that's okay. Kind of like a poem, it's really more about how it makes you feel. It's really more about how you interpret it and what you bring to it and what you get out of it as a result, like poetry, like ambiguity, up for different interpretations. And I think that's the best way to experience this movie. If you look for a just a solid narrative, you're probably going to wind up disappointed. Not unlike a David Lynch movie, this movie is just more about a feel than it is about a plot. It's more about themes and ideas and a vibe, and that it excels very, very well. You just have to be willing to go along for the ride because it's an absurd movie. It really is kind of a horror comedy, and if you go in with that attitude, you're more likely to have a good time if you're just laughing with it because it is somewhat ridiculous. But there is some poignant stuff going on in there too. If you scratch beneath the surface, you'll find some poignancy to this movie. And again, it's what you want to bring to it. And by the end of the movie, they have really tripled down on the ambiguity of it. What is real? What is reality? What is fake? It's all up for grabs by the end of the movie. Again, I'm not going to spoil it for you. Take my word for it. But if you've seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I love it. I absolutely love that sense of not knowing what's going on, but still feeling comfortable about it. You won't feel panic like I'm confused and I don't know what's going on or this is too weird for me. If you can roll with this movie, you'll have a great experience. But it's not going to be for everybody. I admit that. This is an acquired taste kind of movie. A lot of you out there, I know you're into these kind of movies, so I'm definitely recommending it to the class. But I'm admitting it's not for everybody. I just think if you can definitely let yourself go along with the ride and not get too hung up by the movie not making sense, I think you could really enjoy it. It's a really well crafted movie. It's a lot of fun if you let it be fun, and it's a cult classic for a reason. It's not one that a lot of people talk about, and if they are talking about it, maybe you've heard it more as Cemetery Man. I prefer the Italian De la Morte because it just sounds good. But it's a movie that I would definitely recommend, even if it isn't for everybody. Give it a chance. Try it out. And I know some of you have seen it, so let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you don't like it, talk about that too. I'm open to different interpretations because, like I said, this movie lends itself to different interpretations. But I do think it's a wonderful ride. And the last extra credit movie I'm going to mention is a movie called Existenz. And Existenz is a David Cronenberg film, and it's not one of his more well-known ones. It's unfortunate because this movie probably deserves more attention than it's gotten, but it's definitely a wild trip, and it's definitely Cronenberg. If you haven't seen it, the movie is about a video game developer played by Jennifer Jason Leigh who has developed a new virtual reality game called Existenz, and she's trying it out and showing it. And then there are terrorists who are out trying to kill her who don't like virtual reality and don't like that people are getting more and more immersed in virtual reality games, and so they're trying to kill her. And she goes on this wild ride along with her companion, played by Jude Law, and they get into this crazy adventure. And the question is it real or are they stuck in the game? And there's all these layers to whether or not layers of reality. And I don't want to get into it too much because I don't want to spoil it. But this is a movie where you are constantly being challenged with what is real and what is virtual reality. And that's A, part of what makes it fit into ambiguous horror so well. But B, part of what makes it so much fun. It's Cronenberg, right? So Cronenberg doing his body horror thing that he does so very well. So these games, this video game, is designed as organic. Instead of a video game controller like we're used to for like an Xbox, it's an organic controller made of like flesh, like that plugs into a port goes into your spine. So it's biological in nature. And so you have these interesting concepts of like the video game getting a disease, for example. And all of this stuff about organic weapons and stuff, like an organic gun that shoots teeth and things like that. Fascinating stuff that could only come from the mind of Cronenberg. And we will be talking about Cronenberg quite a bit on the channel in the future because he's awesome, frankly. And this is again a hidden gem of his. Like it kind of just went under the radar. It was supposed to be a mainstream movie. It's got Jude Law right before he really broke big. Jennifer Jason Leigh had a budget, and yet for whatever reason, just didn't quite catch on. But what I would tell you is, if you're a fan of the Christopher Nolan movie Inception, you would probably dig this too because it's a similar concept with these different layers of reality and trying to figure out where the base level is, where real reality is. It's the biggest fun of the movie, and it's a wild ride. It's a trip of a movie. I wish more people talked about this movie. I wish people had seen it more. I wish it had gotten more hype and play. I mean, it didn't hurt David Cronenberg too much. He still wound up making some great movies after this, but I really love Existence. It's one of my favorites of his. I think the performances in the movie, Willem Dafoe's in there too. Everybody in the movie is doing a great job, but really what shines is that grotesque organic stuff that's in there. It really takes the cake, and of course it's Cronenberg, right? So this body horror is kind of intertwined with sex in a way that is both erotic and wildly uncomfortable, like the best of Cronenberg. It really is. If you're a Cronenberg fan and you haven't seen this movie, you got to get on it right away. But even if you don't know Cronenberg or anything like that, does this sound like something that would be fun to you? Because if so, I would definitely recommend checking it out. Like I said, some grotesque stuff in here. The gore is real in this movie, but it's such a fun ride. This whole warped reality, this virtual reality, and the ambiguity of if what you're seeing is real or part of the game is so much fun. It's just a wild ride. It's a blast of a movie, and I can't praise it enough. I know some of you out there have seen this movie, so let me know what you think of it. Why do you think it's not more popular? Is it just everybody missing out on it? Was it not promoted well enough, or is it just too gross for everybody? Let me know what you think about that. But for those of you that haven't seen it, I implore you to check it out. Existenz. It's not the most well-known of movies, but it's such a great ride. It's so much fun, and it definitely deserves more eyeballs. So please check it out if you haven't already. So that's it for our exploration into ambiguous horror. Like I said, there's a lot of movies that can be arguably put into the subgenre. So if you've got other suggestions, by all means, leave them in the comments below. I love your guys' suggestions, as you know. But ambiguous horror, it's a lot of fun, man. If you're not going to get too hung up on what happened and needing a definite resolution to your narrative, this subgenre is so much fun to explore. So let's keep exploring it in the comments below. Now, as usual, we're going to do our horror trivia question, where I take a horror trivia pursuit card and read a question live here on camera and try to answer it and let you get a chance to answer it too and see how I do. So let's look, and we'll look at this, which I think is the paranormal category. And the question is, in Session 9 from 2001, what is protagonist Gordon Fleming and his company hired to remove from the abandoned Danvers State Hospital? And I'm not going to lie to you, it's been a minute since I've seen that movie. It's a good movie. We'll talk about it in the future, I think. So I don't want to get too sidetracked on whether or not it's as good as people think it is or the reputation of it. Set all that aside. I liked the movie, but it's been a while since I've seen it. That said, I believe I remember the answer to this question. And side note, it's because I used to have a job where we dealt with this material that's being removed. So I know a strange amount about it. I know a lot about this material that it's kind of weird and random. It's just because a job I used to have. But as a result, I remember this, unless I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, it's going to be really embarrassing. And everything I'm saying is going to be embarrassing, and I'm not going to be able to cut it out because I promised to do this live on the air. But I'm giving you guys a chance to think of an answer for yourselves. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to do that now. So my answer to this question, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, is asbestos. They've been hired to remove asbestos. So let's check the answers. Yep, it's asbestos. I'm right about that. And like I said, I used to have a job, and I know way too much about asbestos. I know a lot about asbestos, which is very handy when I was having it removed from my house. But did you get asbestos right? And if not, what did you guess? Did you think it was something other than asbestos? If you didn't know, did you take a guess? And tell us what that was, because I like to see wrong answers in the comments. Hopefully you got that right, though, and we're on the same page as me with this one. But thanks for participating in the horror trivia question, and thanks for participating in this week's video. I appreciate you guys as always. It's been a lot of fun going through these videos with you and reading what you recommend in the comments, so keep on doing it. Until next week, class dismissed.